Welcome in, everybody. Let's dive right into it. So, in the grim dark, there is only war. Well, war comes in many forms. Some of those forms are pretty damn disgusting, to be entirely honest, and none personify the horrors and the ugliness of war than Papa Nurgle. Now, Nurgle is the chaos god that personifies rot, decay, pestilence, the cycle of death and rebirth. He is known as the Plague Lord, Grandfather Nurgle, Plague Father, the Fly Lord. He is empowered by the despair that mortals feel throughout the universe. Coincidentally, Nurgle is the second of the great chaos gods to be awakened in the warp. He came into being during the second millennium due to the plagues that wreaked havoc across old Earth's European continent in the Middle Ages. And if you didn't know about Warhammer, it does slightly follow our own history. Old Earth, or Terra as it's called, it has the same history as us to an extent. There's just little minor tweaks and changes to certain details along that history. So yeah, Middle Ages, millions are dying due to disease and plague rats and all this kind of good stuff. So Nurgle is there, mostly drawing his power from the suffering of humans. But he does draw from mortals in general. He just has a special connection to humanity and their fear of death and pain, because it was their suffering that birthed him. Just like the Eldar birthed Slanesh via their whole race committing OnlyFans activities. But while Nurgle is the god of rot and decay, he is also the chaos god of perseverance and survival and growth. He grants his followers great resiliency, freedom from pain of any kind, the promise of rebirth after death in some form or fashion. Although the merger of these two concepts, that he is the chaos god of, is exactly where the disgusting part really comes into play. So Nurgle will take, let's say, one of his Death Guard, the Space Marines that follow the demon Primarch Mortarion, who is Nurgle's biggest boy. And Nurgle has one of these Death Guard, and he wants to gift it with an immunity to pain so that nothing will hurt him. He could be shot by bolters, las guns, pierced with swords and spears. Nothing's going to stop him. Well, I mean, one would think, great. Yeah, slap a whole bunch of heavy-plated Space Marine power armor on it, and you've got an unstoppable tank, right? Nurgle gifts his soldiers with other things as well, and he's got a very warped sense of what beauty and perfection and art and stuff really is. So he's going to give the Death Guard that, but he's also going to, like, patch on extra limbs or have this giant tongue come, like, sprouting out of his shoulder and snaking its way through the armor, or just have, like, just over reproductive cells So the Death Guard Marine gets super fat, and all of the fat is just like sloughing off of him. Like it's not pretty what Nurgle is going to give to his followers. There's also lots of like horns and mutations, right? So you'll often see like lots of cyclops or extra eyes, mostly mouths and tongues and tentacles and extra limbs. All that kind of good stuff. You see, you can think of Nurgle as wanting to constantly be encouraging the cycles of life, death, and then rebirth into something more resilient, better, stronger. But the way he does this is by encouraging decay and disease and the spread of those things. So this tank of a Death Guard will be carrying about 24 diseases. He will be dripping maggots by the hundreds from holes in its thickened skin. It'll have gaping mouths and extra limbs bursting through plates of armor. It'll have carrion flies emanating from its eyes and its mouths. Bustles and boils will be exploding and refilling underneath its suit, causing just a constant flow of ooze and pus to be puddling in its wake. So, yeah, to say the least, the standard follower of Nurgle is pretty much that iconic visage, right? Just a walking petri dish of diseases and plagues that Nurgle has cooked up in a big black cauldron. And Nurgle is also always laughing and not sad, but he is kind of melancholy-ish, right? He's jolly and sort of depressed. These inane emotions are represented in his disease spreading as well. From death and dead things come viruses, bacteria, insects, and other carrion that are the beginnings of new life that is more resilient and more powerful than the previous life that those things are now devouring. So he gets into a funk, and then he goes outside of his big old disease mansion that he has in his realm. He goes to these things called the deathbeds, where the souls of all of these fallen enemy soldiers and trapped combatants and things, they're stuck in these deathbeds, right? And they're eating worms and mud for eternity. So Papa Nurgle, good old Grandfather Nurgle, is in a bit of a melancholy state, so he'll waddle out to these deathbeds, pick up a few of these trapped souls, and he'll shake them around and say, "Hey, I need some inspiration. Tell me some stories about where you're from," and that'll, get my jollies up a little bit, and I will release you from these deathbeds. And the souls wanting to escape their deathbeds, they will regale Nurgle as best they can. Nurgle will then take these souls back to his cauldron. He'll lather them with puddles of disease and pestilence from his cauldron, and then send them back into the materium from whence they came, to their homes, to their worlds, and just, okay, here you go. And he thinks that's a very equal and even exchange, right? Nurgle actually believes that he's doing something good, where in reality he is unleashing just monstrous horrors and mutated evils and plague that's just unspeakably horrific, right? But it's not how Nurgle sees it. He thinks he's being very generous. Now, each one of the Chaos Gods has their own contradictions. There's a different side to their to their coin, right? With Khorne, we had blood, death, slaughter, 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 but we also have honor, truth, encouraging strength and discipline. With Nurgle, well, there is decay, rot, disease, and constantly spreading plague, but there is also mirth and freedom from anguish and pains that life might bring you. There's this sort of bliss that Nurgle bestows upon his followers, and they will gladly follow his beloved children into battle if his children say so, because while they are going out and fighting things, Nurgle sees them as spreading his hobby, right? His pestilence and disease. So, like I said, you gotta think like Nurgle thinks. It's very skew to what's actually happening here. And also with Nurgle, there are new ways to grow, new maladies and new plagues to be made in his great cauldron that he's going to unleash upon the universe, so that the materium may become more additions to his abundant garden. And that garden is horrifying. There are forests of rotting Eldari where they are conscious and their innards are exposed and they're just slothing and oozing down these dead trees that the Eldari spirits have warped into. There are plains of tongues that are just disease bearers. There are also these weird tongue beetles where the legs are fingers and the entire body is like a human tongue. It's really stinking creepy and ugh. There are bogs and marshes where bot flies the size of elephants birth and swarm around in the billions like flying black mountains of decay and hunger. And this is all within the decayed domain of the plague god. Instead of a bastion fortress realm like Khorne, Nurgle has this big, bountiful, unending garden that's also kind of like a lab for him to test out all of his stuff, right? But he doesn't just have some cool digs, Papa Nurgle. No. He doesn't just grant his followers freedom from pain. He doesn't just spread rot and plague everywhere he can go. No. Nurgle is also somewhat of a romantic. That's right. Nurgle's got himself a lady friend. So, at one point, there was an Eldari goddess of the harvest, of fertility, healing, and growth. Her name was Aisha. Aisha, mind you, is an Eldari goddess, and the Eldari, in their endless amounts of debauchery, let's say, they birthed the chaos god Slaanesh, who proceeded to devour most of the souls of the entire Eldari race. And Slaanesh even went after their gods. And as she was about to devour Aisha, the forces of Nurgle thundered in and rescued her, quote-unquote, from the Prince of Pleasure's maw. Now, Nurgle's forces bring her back to the Plague Gardens in the Chaos Realm, where Nurgle would test his newly made diseases and pestilence on the body of the goddess to see how they would be effective and see how they'll fare in the mortal realm. Because that's Nurgle's idea of what you do with a fertility goddess and a goddess of growth and harvest that you fall in love with. It's really stinking sick and twisted, but that is Nurgle's view. And it is said that Aisha is still imprisoned there, whispering the cures to all of Nurgle's plagues, to psychers and warp sensitives who can hear her psychic beckoning. So she's caught up in this rusted giant cage that Nurgle has in his garden. And she all the while, Nurgle has got this big old ladle popping out this green oozy acid kind of snot looking stuff, and he's just pouring it all over this goddess. She is whispering through the warp to anyone that can hear her how mortals can fend off this new disease, which is pretty ballsy in the case of this goddess, not gonna lie. So yeah, that's how Nurgle shows his love and affection, just pouring out all of his concoctions. Don't quite care for that kind of love and affection. But Nurgle doesn't only have a lover. No. He also views all of his beasts of Nurgle, his Death Guard, his Plague Bearers, his Unclean Ones, who are his top generals, and his demon Primarch Mortarion as his children. Mortarion is probably the most notable of his dreaded servants. I mean, this guy is menacing, to say the least. He is the leader of the fallen Space Marine Legion, the Death Guard. He is another Primarch who fell during the Horus Heresy. He stands about 60 feet tall. He has this huge battle scythe called Silence. He's got some pretty sick-looking wings. He has the same rotting armor and visage as the rest of Nurgle's followers, so his power armor is kind of pocked with holes and tentacles and boils and such. It's pretty cool looking. He's also probably one of the smartest Primarchs, demon or loyal to the Empire, that's still around. He's able to wage a huge invasion of Ultramar, which is a majority portion of the Imperium of Man that's ruled by Robute Guilliman, his Primarch brother. And he doesn't... Mortarion doesn't really lose. Well, I take that back. He doesn't win, but he does inflict a metric ton of damage to Ultramar and the Imperium. So, yeah, Nurgle's got some badass and sickening minions going for him. He's also a really big rival with the Chaos God of Change, Tzeentch. These two are kind of rivals because they're powered by opposing mortal emotions, right? Where Tzeentch gets his powers from mortals' hope and their capacity for change and their ability to alter their destinies. Nurgle's power comes from defiance born from despair and hopelessness at the inevitability of death. Now this plays out in the Materium as well. right? Say if you had the followers of Nurgle spreading their powers of rot and stagnation and decay. I mean, this is directly going to mess up Tzeentch's followers and their sorcerous ways of continuous alteration and preservation through the warp and the power that they get by just being sneaky little bastards. Now, Nurgle is also a bit different from the other Chaos Gods in a very slight way that I kind of already touched on. Khorne rarely leaves his throne to wage his wars, right? If at all. He's barking commands to his generals the entire time. Slaanesh wanders the universe to tempt mortals into giving up their souls for pleasures in return. Tzeentch is just spending his time plotting and interfering wherever he can. But Nurgle relishes just wandering about his garden. He is spending his days concocting new plagues, taking midday strolls, playing with his demon children, visiting the deathbeds, and he's doing all of this with a jovial smile and raucous laughter. He doesn't really care to go out and conquer anything. He doesn't want to control or dominate his enemies. I mean, Grandfather Nurgle only wants to go about his hobbies. Is that so bad? Yes. Yes, it absolutely is. It is horrific and gut-wrenching and beyond vile in every way possible. And I can't with Nurgle. Nurgle also has one of those very special numbers. His sacred number is 7. And like Khorne's followers, it is heavily emphasized by his devout children. One great example of the use of symbology surrounding the sacred number was when Mortarion was invading Ultramar, and he made use of these things called the warp clocks. These were chaos instruments that he used to weaken the boundaries between real space and the realm of Nurgle's garden, so that more just terrifying beings could pass into the Materium far easier and in greater number. Now, knowing Nurgle, like we do, he doesn't really inspire a lot of cultists or mortal followers that start out on their own. Like, nobody's going out and being like, okay, I've made my decision, Mom and Dad. I'm going to go follow Papa Nurgle. No one's doing that. His diseases and sicknesses tend to reach out and twist the minds of people and pollute their souls. So mortals are twisted and driven to a sort of madness that drives them into the Chaos God's service. I mean, how else is the god of rot going to convince anyone to become a walking pile of putrid pestilence and puking pus? Rot their minds and twist their souls. And that's how Dad did it. That's how Papa Nurgle does it. And it's not going wrong for him so far. So yeah, that's Grandfather Nurgle, and does he give me the absolute creeps. I read the Plague Wars books, and the details in those books about just there's this one guardsman that it follows for a few chapters who is at this hospital on the planet Iax, and his mind is touched by like some sort of plague, and it starts driving him kind of insane, and he wanders out like to this field where he's got maggots bursting out of his eyes, and it's just, it was pretty intense and disgusting. But in a way, that's one big thing that I love about Warhammer in general. It is unforgivingly what it advertises. Grim, dark, war, death, slaughter, little to no hope, and an abundance of sadness and carnage. And it doesn't apologize for it. It doesn't change. And I love that about a huge franchise. I mean, yeah, there's character development and some typical things and plot devices that are used to move the story along. But I mean, it just gets worse. I mean, as soon as some things get better, other things get monumentally worse. I mean, it's almost poetic how fun it ends up being. And yeah, Nurgle is a pretty damn big part of it. Well, that is all I had time for today, guys. Thank you all so much for tuning in. Stick around for more Sci-Fi Unchained. But for now, live long and prosper, my friends, and may the Force be with us all.